what acquirers believe, and not everybody would agree with this, but most acquirers believe if you have shown that you can be successful on multiple channels, it shows that you have real brand value that can stand the test of time.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of What's Working in E-commerce. I'm your host, Eagan Heath. I am at Asymmetric Marketing. You can find us at asymmetric.pro. We help with paid search, paid social, email automation, on-site SEO, and e-commerce websites as well. Today, we're talking about how to build and sell a business. Very exciting. We have a true pro on to talk with us. His name is Jason Somerville, and he is a founding partner at GW Partners, as well as South Call, where they are an accelerator for e-commerce businesses. Jason, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks, Eagan. Glad to be here, man. Appreciate it.
Right on. So we were chatting beforehand, and you said the landscape is different. If someone wants to build and sell an e-commerce business, what you might say today is different than 3 to 5 years ago. Why is that, and what is different?
Yeah, I think we went through the period of pandemic and kind of post-pandemic where I think a lot of things got tested from an e-commerce perspective, right? We saw it was almost this forced experiment that COVID created, and there were quite a few learnings from that experiment. It kind of created a bit of I'd say a bubble. It had very bubble-like characteristics in late 2020 and 21, where I think there was a view that growing e-commerce businesses was easier than it actually is. You know, protecting e-commerce businesses from competition was easier than it really is. And I think unfortunately, you saw it with brand aggregators and other types of investment vehicles that came in and kind of bid up the price of e-commerce businesses, that they learned a lot of those lessons, unfortunately, the hard way. So what tends to happen a lot in markets is things swing like a pendulum. So they swung in one direction, it got pretty bubbly. Now it's swung back. And I think that if there's one sort of, I'd say, phrase that currently is really driving thinking around e-com businesses and how to acquire them and how to grow them is kind of a return to fundamentals. And that tends to happen a lot when you see markets getting overheated. The fundamentals get tossed aside, and then eventually, as they swing back, it's those fundamentals that ultimately win the day. We've seen it throughout history in a lot of different markets, and e-commerce kind of went through their own version of it in 2020, 2021, and now it's back to focusing on the fundamentals.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Years ago, when I worked a corporate job, I was kind of on the financial independence, retire early train. I was trying to invest a lot of money. And one of the books I read was about irrational exuberance of just when those markets get frothy, it changes all the valuations, make things look easier than it really is. And it kind of distorts what's really going on underneath. So it's a good reminder there's real businesses under these assets, whether it's publicly traded stock or privately held businesses like this. So I really appreciate that. Maybe you could talk a bit about your experience and kind of your firms of what do you guys do and what are you seeing in this space?
Sure. Yeah. At GW Partners, we're an advisory firm where we kind of do two things and we bring them together. On the one hand, we're helping businesses grow and scale in a way that is going to make them much more attractive from an acquisition perspective. And then we lead them through a sell-side investment banking process when the time does come to actually go to market and sell the business to ensure that they're getting the most optimized outcome that they can get. Usually what that means is you've created something that has real strategic significance and strategic value as staying power. We could definitely get into what the fundamentals of a highly attractive e-commerce business are. What do they look like? What characteristics do they possess? So we're kind of helping founders build those businesses into those shining kind of beacons of light. And then when we go and take those businesses out to market, there's quite a lot of demand for them because of that work that's been done ahead of time to create something that someone's going to really value. So that's what we do on the GW Partner side. Yeah. And on South Call, we I'd say it's kind of putting our money where our mouth is even more on those, where we invest in growing kind of early stage consumer brands and offer kind of guidance from at a board level when we sit on the boards of directors and we become part of the cap table, and we become part of the ownership group, and then we grow those, and kind of with the same end goal in mind, where after, say, a typical period of maybe 2 years, we would take those to market and sell. So we're early in our history there with that, and so we've got a few portfolio companies, and we're currently growing and building those, and probably expect to maybe have our first sale maybe next year in South Call.
Okay. Well, thank you. I'm looking at the site here. It looks great. You've got a lot of great experience here, Jason. What are those activities you're doing to make a company more valuable to sell? I was really intrigued. I read as it built to sell, John Warrillow, I believe it was, and just sort of that piece, it really stuck with me of you're almost, if you're an entrepreneur and you're sort of just creating products or services to sell to customers, you're missing out on this larger game, which is you're creating this whole value creation process that you can then step away from, sell. And that's really the bigger thing. I know you can get multiples on your earnings and things like that. And so anything you're doing to improve those fundamentals is obviously really going to drive a better sales price. What are those things day to day that you're working with people on to make their companies more valuable?
Yeah, so the short answer is everything. But the more specific answer is, as we go through a business, we do actually assess every part of the company and try to determine how is this going to look from an acquirer's standpoint. So we would start with a consumer products business. You might start with the products themselves, right? How do these products compare in the market? What is their position? Are there things truly unique about these products, or are they somewhat commoditized? So a good example might be product development is a place we spend a lot of time with founders in consumer products businesses, because that's really the foundation, right? The two main foundations of any consumer products company are the products themselves and the branding that's wrapped around those products, right? And so I would say those are the two places we spend the most time. I think I mentioned before these things that are really driving value in today's market, and product differentiation and product, I'd say, protection, and what you can do to not only build moats around what you've created, but have a very effective product development process that kind of ensures that over time you're going to have consistent winners with your customers. Those are very big focus points right now for anybody acquiring a business, that's in the consumer products game, which, again, you think about it, well, there's not a lot more fundamental to a CPG company than products, right? It's kind of the thing that starts everything. And so I think the market is kind of making people just have to get better at thinking through how they develop product, how they bring those products to market. So is it features and benefits? Is it unique intellectual property? Is it, an insight into a particular type of customer, and you really know what they want? So your insight is kind of your secret weapon, which allows you to create products that that base is going to like. So that's a great example. Another one, which I know is near and dear to you, Eagan, is marketing. We spend a ton of time, with the marketing teams of these companies. Sometimes they're internal, sometimes they're external. I think one of the biggest, I'd say, challenges is making sure that the finance team, the leadership team, and the marketing team are all on the same page. That we see a lot of founder-owned companies that's not the case, right? So you've got a lot of people rowing hard, they're giving it their all, but they're not going in the right, all in the same direction. So that's another place we spend a lot of time, and making sure that founders and their leadership and marketing teams kind of understand the economics that we need to be shooting at, and how do we develop a plan that's going to achieve those economics. So I could go on for hours on that, but there's a couple examples right there.
Yeah, that's great. I'm wondering if there are metrics that you guys are driving toward. Is it average order value? Is it lifetime customer value, profit margins, cost per new customer acquisition, or cost per customer acquisition? What are kind of the KPIs you guys are watching that you're trying to improve before a sale?
Yeah, I would say some of those you just mentioned are all key. I think it's always in the context of the brand and the kinds of products that it sells, of course. I mean, obviously, as you're well aware, if I have a one-time purchase kind of durable good, That's a little bit of a different model than if I have a repeat customer consumable type of business or brand. So the KPIs that really matter and what the benchmarks are is obviously particular to the category and the company we're talking about. But if we think about which are the ones most important right now, anything that sort of indicates what I would call brand value through customer loyalty is very much a focal point right now. That's kind of why you're seeing a lot of the deals that are happening are in repeat purchase type of products right now, because there's a little bit of, I'd say, nervousness in the market around consumer discretionary spending. And if we do get a little bit rockier in the economy, how's that pullback? If there's a pullback, who's it going to affect and how much? So what investors really look at is, well, where can I feel really safe? Like, where can I feel safe? Well, I can feel safe if I have a brand that shows its customers are not only fanatical, but they're loyal and they buy a lot and they come back a lot. And that makes me feel safe that I've got something here that's got real staying power. So, I mean, what are those kinds of metrics, right? I mean, look, LTV curves are a great metric that sort of shows over time what a cohort or what a particular customer is worth. And how are those curves shifting, right? So, if my last 8 months worth of cohorts at the 3-month LTV mark were at 70, but then my most recent group was at 74. Okay, I'm getting an like at the same point in the curve, I'm getting a higher LTV, right? So it's showing that I'm improving my loyalty. That's like a good metric that's kind of proving that out. Not to mention, of course, just things like repeat order rate. Of course, if you have a subscription model, or are you moving more and more people into subscription? Because someone being willing to sign up to subscription is an indicator of loyalty, that they're kind of like, hey, I like this brand enough to sign up for a subscription. So I think KPIs that are very much getting a lot of focus are anything that demonstrates that brand value and that repeat customer loyalty.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for talking about those. One thing that really intrigues me about brands is it sort of straddles both sides of the brain, right? It's this creative piece. It's like, what part of the consumer mind space does it have? Where does it sit? How do people think and feel about it? But on the other side, here we are, brass tacks, talking about how acquirers see your business. And it translates to all these other pieces of repeat purchase rate, willingness to subscribe, sticking with the subscription, lifetime customer value. I wonder if you can just reflect on that. Of, how do you talk about what a brand is and how you increase that balloon of value, or however else you think about it?
Yeah, no, it's a great point. And what's interesting, I've been in lots and lots of rooms and negotiations where the acquirer is sort of talking about how they see brand, right? And the truth of the matter is they do sort of see it with both sides of the brain, and they both carry value, right? So we just talked about a couple ways that quantitatively you can demonstrate a brand value. It doesn't feel as esoteric or as hard to kind of wrap your hands around. That really matters, especially to someone acquiring a business that, if I think about most acquisitions, if I were to break down what percentage of we'll call it weight of the decision is quantitative versus qualitatively based, I would say probably 60 to 70% of the decision is quantitatively based. I'd say the other 30 to 40% of the decision is qualitatively based. So a lot of things fall into that qualitative bucket. This is one of them, that kind of that other side of the brain of brand value. And I think what tends to happen there is they look for those, we'll call it softer demonstrations of brand awareness. How many mentions are we getting when our customers talk about us and they kind of, let's say, post their experience with products on a social platform? What's just the level of excitement around what we're doing? Like, it's kind of that buzz factor, but not in sort of a short-term fad-like way. But what are we showing, like that sustainable building of customers just want to talk about our products? And when a particular, say, type of category is being discussed, are we in the conversation? Are we not in the conversation? Right. And that's where stuff like even certain PR activities or awards that you might win for your products or things like that, which kind of demonstrate that you're out there in the zeitgeist and you are part of the conversation in your particular, call it, category. Those help a lot from an acquirer's standpoint. They basically say, okay, people are talking about this. It feels like it has momentum behind it. It feels like we're going in the right direction over time. So, and it's funny because it's harder because then you do get into subjectivity, and subjectivity involves humans. Humans are subjective, right? Math is not. But humans are the ones who do these deals. Like humans are the ones who decide we're going to buy this company. So those things all matter ultimately. So that's kind of how it gets talked about and thought about from both sides of the brain.
Yeah, I find it utterly fascinating. I mark that clip, Jason. I think I'm on a journey with this too. Of I started SEO and Google Ads, kind of on that quantitative side, analysis side. How do we get new customers? How do we acquire that way? But the longer I'm in marketing here, this is year number 8, going on more. It's like this whole creative piece of it, this sort of feelings and associations part of it is just so core. And I'm surprised to hear you think it's 30 to 40% of that. The acquirer is thinking of that. They're not just looking at the numbers. They're not just this capitalist with a spreadsheet sort of thing. It really is some touchy feely, ineffable sort of stuff. Is that right?
It is, yeah. And I think look, obviously, when it comes to an e-commerce business, there's a lot of quantitative information that gets digested during an acquisition process. So don't get me wrong, it's mountains and mountains of data. And most of the time, acquirers employ a lot of people who are really quantitatively oriented to analyze that data. However, I think if I were to probably summarize it, the data oftentimes determines price and sometimes determines if you really like this company or not. But more often than not, if you really like this company, this hypothetical XYZ company, it will be heavily driven by qualitative factors. I like this. I like this management team. I like this brand. I think what they're doing is very interesting. It's different. It's getting people's attention. These kinds of statements, which aren't necessarily purely backed up by data, are part of these discussions, like a big part of it, right? So, like, again, when we're on the phone about a deal and we're talking to a potential acquirer who's seen the marketing materials and they start asking us a bunch of questions like, so tell me a little more about this company. Yeah, I mean, those conversations, there's a lot of data talk, but there's also a lot of talk about all these other, we'll call it softer attributes.
Love it. Love it. I want to keep going on this, Jason, but I feel like I should change channels a little bit. I wonder if you could talk about sales and marketing channels. I'm thinking direct to consumer through the website, selling through Walmart or Amazon, maybe selling through retailers or brick and mortar. How does that figure into this process?
Yeah, again, a good question, especially very topical for today. So I think a lot of your audience is probably well aware of kind of the Amazon brand aggregator experiment that occurred over the last few years, and the fact that has not gone well for most. And I think that is a good sort of microcosm of where we're at now. Is omni-channel brands are more attractive than, call it, one channel dominant brands right now. And so if I were an e-commerce brand owner right now that was one channel dominant, I would be looking to figure out how do I diversify my channels, but not just purely for the sake of diversification, but that are going to actually be accretive to my business. Because if I can, and it's funny because it actually translates back to the whole idea of brand value, because what acquirers believe, and not everybody would agree with this, but most acquirers believe, if you have shown that you can be successful on multiple channels, it shows that you have a real brand value that can stand the test of time, because it's not like you were just a great tactician in one channel and that's why you were successful. You're actually successful because at your core, you have a great brand and great products that people like, and they're going to find you and want to buy your products wherever they're sold.
Yeah, that's really well
That's
put.
the
Thank
meaning
you.
that's given to those. So, yeah, I would say you want to look for channel diversification if it makes sense. Now, it doesn't always make sense, and that's okay. But if we're talking about like comparing better versus best, best would be some decent omni-channel diversification where you're successful on all the channels.
Yeah, love it. I want to rewind just 1 second, Jason. You said the whole aggregator experience. So those were companies that were basically folding in Amazon brands or Amazon companies and kind of acquiring them and putting them in. For anybody who's not familiar, kind of what happened there, or how do you tell the story?
Yeah, in short, I would say in a nutshell, about 20 to 30 billion dollars was raised between 2020 and 2022 for vehicles to go and acquire smaller Amazon brands, aggregate them, put them all under one roof, with the thought that you could create a lot of synergies, mostly through financial engineering, create value by taking a lot of small things, putting them together, and kind of the 1+1=3 type of plan. Well, unfortunately, what happened was because a lot of the purchases happened at the peak of pandemic online activity, there was a lot of overpaying for those brands, is what it kind of, a lot of these vehicles, they paid too high a price and they funded it mostly with debt. And so when you saw a reversion to the mean in e-commerce, their model basically broke. And so you've got most of them either going bankrupt or kind of doing these mergers by necessity because otherwise they would go bankrupt. And the largest of all of those is a company called Thracian that just filed for bankruptcy this week. So what it did, though, I think there was a couple lessons with that. We could have a whole episode on Amazon Marketplace itself, but I think the lesson that was learned was sort of what I mentioned in the beginning. The fundamentals of whether you're selling on Shopify or whether you're selling on Amazon, it is not easy to just show up and build these businesses. It's hard, right? And competition, it's kind of, I think a lot of people get excited when they see a market growing, like the e-commerce has been growing steadily for years. But the thing you don't always think about it is the bigger a market gets, the more competition is going to be present in that market. So as competition heats up, it's harder and harder to succeed, right? It just gets harder. People learn, the market learns, individual participants learn. And I think that a lot of assumptions about e-commerce brands and how hard or easy it is to grow or hard or easy it is to protect were, I think, they were a little premature. They were a little, let's say, over optimistic about that. And I think that's what I'm sure a lot of your audience that are brand owners, they know this firsthand. If you ask if they've started their company in 2017 and you say, is it harder today than it was in 2017? I think almost all of them would say absolutely. Even though the market, e-commerce in general, has grown quite a bit.
Yeah. Just to add to that, Jason, this might be what you're saying is your cost per customer acquisition goes up too on the channels of if money flocks to Meta or Google or whatever the next platform is. Those are auctions. And so the cost to advertise and get new customers increases too. I think that's just a part of what you're saying. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a big part of it. I think another, I mentioned product development before. I think that's another one where, look, there's pros and cons to capitalism, right? One of the pros is that over time, it actually forces people to innovate and get better. Like you can't stand still and expect to like just succeed. So something where you could get away with it before, I'm going to call it just say less innovation, less attention to detail. Maybe there were some areas that your business was weak in, but you could kind of get away with it. You wouldn't really feel the pain. Well, that's not the case anymore. It's kind of like you have to be good everywhere. There's no way to like fake anything anymore. You have to be good everywhere if you want to have sustained success, which is both. I mean, to me, that's exciting, right? It's always good when the market makes you level your game up. And I think that's what's happening.
Yeah, that's great. Sometimes in biology too, they talk about the Red Queen syndrome. Is
Yeah.
you got to run faster and faster just to stay in place, just to evolve against those other predators and species. And same story in the economy. So, Jason, this is so great. I'm really enjoying this conversation. I know you need to run here in a little bit. I appreciate all your generosity with us and sharing this. Who's a good person to reach out to you, and where can they find you guys?
Yeah, so I mean, look, if you're an e-commerce brand owner, that's primarily who our clients are. It's who we work with in South Call. So anybody that's a brand owner, we'd love to talk to. I think for us, we try to be of help. I mean, we kind of have a passion for helping founders. That's really why we decided to start our company 7 years ago. So even if a brand owner talks to us and they're not necessarily a fit for us as a client, we try our best to like help in some way. Maybe we give them a great resource. Maybe we point them in the right direction on a particular question or problem they're having. So we just love to talk to founders. So we're always happy to do that. And you can find us, gw.partners is the best place, or you can email me directly at jason@gw.partners.
Sounds good. I see South Call as well as southcol.co. Check that
That's
out.
right.
Jason, thank you so much for coming on and sharing what's working in e-commerce.
Yeah. Thanks, Eagan. Appreciate it, man.